that Woke is a very, very relatable show because I think we all have to grapple somewhat with knowing that there are problems in the world that it's within our power to try to help to solve, even if we can't personally fix them. But we have to grapple with how much are we willing to do and how much are we willing to just sit there and be comfortable and go about our lives because that's easier. And that's, a really interesting theme, and that's something that Woke grapples with in an interesting way. I was actually only going to watch a few episodes of this before I reviewed it because I wasn't all that interested and didn't really expect to like it that much. But I actually ended up binging the whole thing in one sitting. It's not that long, 8 episodes. So if you have the time, I actually recommend you do it. But before I get into more of my thoughts on Woke, if you're new to the channel, I'm Drew, by the way. And if you're interested in seeing my reviews of upcoming shows, movies, and sometimes books, I highly recommend you subscribe so you don't miss a thing. And if you give me a like, I'd appreciate it. So, Woke is a live action Hulu comedy series that has animated sequences. It's basically the origin story of Keith Knight, who is this black cartoonist who is on the verge of mainstream success with his cartoon Toast and Butter. But then he experiences a traumatic incident with law enforcement, which results in him gaining the superpower of hearing inanimate objects speak to him, forcing him to grapple with the racial injustices that he would prefer to ignore and just go about his life normally. So, Lamorne Morris is really wonderful here. I always will think of him as Winston from New Girl, and in that show he was always a delight, but I never really saw him as leading man material. But boy, was I wrong. He is excellent here, and he's a great anchor for this show. I think that he brings this effortless relatability and likability to this character, and he's just a bright, shining light in this show. Someone who I think is very, very affable and likable, and someone who we can relate to as he navigates the social issues of our day as he lives in San Francisco. Now, this pilot episode, you feel as though the show is heading towards him making some big life-changing decision and sending his life in a new direction. And it sort of is, but it's more that he realizes he can't keep going on the way he has been going on. And then in the next episodes, it's kind of him hanging out with his roommates and meeting a new potential girlfriend as he tries to sort out a lot of these issues and figure out what he wants to do now that he's kind of burned some bridges and set himself off on a new course. And it ends up being kind of just a buddy hanging out story more often than not. It's just people hanging out having conversations. But it works. I think that the cast has a lot of chemistry. I think that the actors playing his roommates in particular are very, very funny. Blake Anderson playing Gunther and T. Murph playing Clovis. They both bring a lot of charm and humor as kind of the sidekick types, but they're very, very interesting. And I liked Rose McIver as his potential girlfriend, Adrian, which leads to a very, very funny joke about Rocky being the prequel to Creed. And the show also features Sasheer Zamata as Ayana, who is someone who challenges Keith constantly as he considers what it means for him to be a black man in America. And one of the things that this show grapples with a lot, and the show is based on the real life experiences of Keith Knight, loosely, who is one of the co-creators of this show. And one of the themes that the show really grapples with is how black artists are often expected to make something that has cultural significance. When Ryan Coogler makes a Marvel movie, he makes Black Panther, whereas when other Marvel movies come out, you often get Thor the Dark World or Ant-Man not dissing those movies, just saying there is this expectation that when black artists do whatever they do, that it has to be culturally significant. And it's interesting when you think about all the pieces of entertainment coming from black artists in this day and age, whether it be Jordan Peele or Watchmen or other shows and movies, how this has tended to be the trend. And this character who initially doesn't want to do that, he just wants to coast, but then finds himself kind of pushed towards this. And I think it's interesting because to me, is there anything really wrong with just wanting to coast? That's a question that this show grapples with. And this could be annoying because I find that I don't actually agree with everything that the characters think or say in this show. But what makes this show good, I think, in a large part, is that all the characters have something to learn. It's not just that Keith is perfect and that his experience of racial injustice sets him on a path of setting all the other people straight. It's that he has a lot to learn himself, as do all the characters. They all have flaws and ways of thinking that they need to sort through and reconsider. And it's through these discussions that they have with each other that they all grow. If I had a criticism of this show, it would be that I think that it doesn't necessarily have enough of a high concept. Initially, they kind of have these animated sequences where he's talking to different inanimate objects, and it's kind of forcing him to grapple with the reality of what it means to be black in America. But a lot after the first couple episodes, this kind of drifts away. You get some pretty nice cameos when this starts from pretty well-known actors. But for me, this shtick didn't really work, and I felt like it was a little bit grating. Personally, I was more interested when the show moved away from this to the discussions between the real animate characters. But what I think hurts the show a little bit is it is really just a bunch of people hanging out in San Francisco. Kudos to them for not setting it in New York City. Nothing against you, New York. I'm just tired of every show being set there. But I think that there's a lot of interesting discussions. A lot of different things get brought up, but there's not really a unifying theme or a unifying high concept in my mind. I think that there's a lot of just different episodic storylines, which isn't necessarily a problem, but it does keep the show from, I think, having this through line, which I initially thought it would, based on the fact that it has a very, very strong inciting incident in the moment where Keith finds he can no longer ignore the racial injustice in America after he has his own traumatizing incident with the police. After that moment, you think that this is going to head in one direction, and then the way that it kind of gradually moves towards him adjusting his life, it was not quite what I expected. I expected things to kick off more quickly. And a lot of the show actually ends up just being him trying to figure out how to make ends meet after he loses his initial source of income. So, it wasn't quite as unified in its themes as I expected. But I enjoyed the conversations. I enjoyed the humor. I think some people might criticize this show because it errs on the side of being a comedy as opposed to being more dramatic as something like Atlanta would be. But I don't hold it against it. I'm glad that in having these really topical discussions, it decides to be more focused on humor. I think for me personally, this show is a pleasant surprise, and I'd give it a B+. I know that some people aren't going to like it, but if you think that woke is like a term that's kind of meant as an insult, then maybe you should go watch Gladiator or The Sopranos instead and just leave this show alone. But for others, I'd highly recommend checking it out, especially if you have any interest. So those are my thoughts on woke, but let me know what you thought in the comments. If you're interested in seeing more reviews of upcoming shows and movies, please consider subscribing. And as always, you can watch more videos right now.